The sun rose over the red rooftops of Abeokuta, a peaceful town in the western part of Nigeria. The birds chirped joyfully as if they knew something special was about to happen. In one small house near a big rock called Olumo Rock, a baby boy was born. The date was July 13, 1934. His name was Akinwent Wole Soyinka, but everyone would soon know him as Wole Soyinka. From the very beginning, Wole was different. Even as a baby, he was quiet and observant. He watched everything and everyone around him. His parents were both teachers. His father, Samuel, was strict but fair. People called him Essay because he loved writing essays and teaching. His mother, Grace, was known as Wild Christian because of how strongly she believed in religion and discipline. Wole grew up in a house full of books, rules and questions. His home was full of life. There were always people visiting, students coming for lessons and neighbors dropping by to talk. Wole liked to sit in the corner and listen. He heard stories about Yoruba traditions, politics, religion, and village life. These early experiences would shape his future in powerful ways. Wole started school at an early age. At 5, he could already read better than most children twice his age. He attended St. Peter's Primary School and then moved to Abeokuta Grammar School. He was always top of his class. But Wole was not just smart. He was also curious, bold, and not afraid to speak up. One day, when he was around 10 years old, a British colonial officer came to his school to give a speech. Everyone stood up to clap politely, but Wole didn't. The teacher scolded him, but he said, "Why should I clap for someone who does not know our language or our culture?" That moment shocked the teachers, but it also showed them that Wole was brave and ready to stand for what he believed in. As Wole grew older, he started to notice the unfairness in his society. The British were in control of Nigeria at the time. They made the laws, collected taxes, and treated Nigerians like second-class people in their own land. Wole didn't like that. He asked many questions in school. Why couldn't Nigerians lead their own country? Why did the British act like they were better? His teachers didn't always have answers, but Wole found comfort in books. He read everything he could find: African stories, Shakespeare, Greek plays, political writings. Books opened his mind and helped him see the world in a different way. He was especially drawn to plays and poetry. He loved how writers could use words to challenge the powerful and inspire people. In his teenage years, Wole was sent to government college in Ibadan. It was one of the best schools in Nigeria. There, he met other smart boys who would later become important figures in Nigeria's future. Wole continued to stand out. He joined the literary and debating society, wrote short plays, and began performing them with his friends. His love for drama and writing was growing stronger. After finishing secondary school, Wole went to University College, Ibadan, in 1952. It was a time of political change. Young Nigerians were beginning to demand freedom from British rule. Wole joined student protests, wrote fiery essays in the school magazine, and gave speeches on campus. But while many students shouted and waved signs, Wole used his pen. He believed that art and writing were the most powerful tools for change. One day, Wole wrote a play that made fun of the colonial government. It was funny but also very sharp. Some people laughed, but others were angry. His professors called him in and warned him to be careful. But Wole was not afraid. He believed that the truth should never be hidden, no matter how uncomfortable it was. In 1954, Wole won a scholarship to study in England at the University of Leeds. It was a big step for a boy from Abeokuta. He packed his bags, said goodbye to his family, and boarded a ship for the long journey. The cold English weather shocked him, but he soon settled into his studies. In England, Wole focused on literature and drama. He studied Shakespeare, Greek, tragedies, and modern European plays. But he never forgot his roots. He often compared what he learned with Yoruba culture and traditional African drama. He began writing plays that mixed both worlds' African stories with European styles. This unique mix became his trademark. At Leeds, Wole met writers and thinkers from all over the world. He discussed politics, race, and art with fellow students. But he also missed home. He missed the sounds, the smells, the people, and the colors of Nigeria. So, he began writing even more poems, plays, and essays filled with the spirit of his homeland. By the time he graduated, Wole had made up his mind. He would return to Nigeria, but not just to live a quiet life. He wanted to use his art to fight injustice, tell African stories, and speak truth to power. He knew the road would not be easy, but he was ready. And so, in 1960, Wole Soyinka came back home. Nigeria was about to gain its independence from Britain. A new future was opening, and Wole was determined to be part of it. He returned not just as a writer, but as a voice for the people. This was only the beginning of a long journey, one filled with struggle, courage, and greatness. A journey that would take him to prisons and stages, to protests and Nobel Prizes. But it all began in a small town near a giant rock, with a boy who dared to ask questions. Nigeria became an independent country in 1960, and the air was full of hope and excitement. People danced in the streets, waved flags, and dreamed of a new future. Wole Soyinka had returned from England just in time to witness this historic moment. But while many celebrated, Wole watched closely. He believed independence was only the first step. What would come next? Would the new leaders bring justice, peace, and freedom, or just more of the same under different faces? Wole was not someone who just watched from the sidelines. Right away, he started writing plays, essays, and articles that spoke about the problems in the new Nigeria. His words were sharp, bold, and honest. He believed that writers had a duty to speak the truth, no matter how dangerous it was. One of his early plays, A Dance of the Forests, was performed during the independence celebrations. Most people expected a happy play to praise the new government. But Wole's play was different. It showed the problems of the past and warned about the mistakes of the future. Many leaders were not happy. They wanted praises, not warnings. But Wole did not care. He had a message to deliver. He began teaching at universities, first at the University of Ibadan and later at the University of Lagos. In the classroom, he encouraged students to think for themselves, question authority, and use their voices. Outside the classroom, he became a public figure. He was often seen at theaters, radio stations, and bookshops, always talking about art, justice, and the soul of Africa. In these years, Wole also founded several theater groups, including the 1960 Masks and the Orison Theater Company. He believed that drama could wake people up and make them see what was wrong in their society. His plays were not just entertainment, they were weapons. On stage, he showed the struggles of ordinary people, the greed of politicians, and the deep beauty of African traditions. But Nigeria was quickly falling into trouble. Corruption grew. Politicians fought for power instead of serving the people. Ethnic groups began to mistrust one another. In 1966, a military coup shook the country. Soldiers overthrew the government, and a time of fear began. Wole Soyinka was deeply worried. He believed that Nigeria was heading for disaster. He began writing letters to military leaders, asking them to do the right thing. He used radio programs to speak directly to the people. He warned against hatred and violence. But things only got worse. By 1967, Nigeria was on the edge of a civil war. The southeastern part of the country, mostly made up of the Igbo ethnic group, wanted to break away and form a new country called Biafra. The federal government said no, and soon, fighting began. Wole was heartbroken. He believed in one Nigeria, where all tribes and groups could live together in peace. He wanted to stop the war before it started. So, in a very risky move, he secretly traveled to the eastern region to meet with Biafran leaders. He wanted to start peace talks, but the government found out. They were angry and suspicious. They said Wole was a traitor for meeting with the enemy. Even though he had no weapons, no army, and no plan to harm anyone, they saw his words as dangerous. On the orders of the military rulers, Wole Soyinka was arrested. He was put in prison without trial. For the next 27 months, more than 2 years, Wole Soyinka was locked up. He was kept in a small cell, often in total darkness. He was not allowed to read, write, or speak to anyone. The prison was cold, dirty, and lonely. Many people thought he would die there. But Wole's spirit did not break. He found ways to keep his mind alive. He memorized poems, wrote secretly on scraps of paper, and made up stories in his head. He thought deeply about life, freedom, and the soul of man. Even in prison, he refused to give up hope. His jailers tried to silence him, but they could not silence his thoughts. When he was finally released in 1969, he was thin, weak, and sick, but his mind was still strong. He later wrote about his prison experience in a powerful book called The Man Died. The title was based on his belief that the man dies in all who keep silent in the face of tyranny. He believed that silence in the face of evil was as dangerous as the evil itself. After prison, Wole was more famous than ever. He became a symbol of courage and freedom. People saw him as a hero who stood up for truth, no matter the cost. He traveled the world, gave speeches, and continued to write. But he never forgot Nigeria. No matter how bad things got, he always returned home. He kept writing plays that exposed the lies of those in power. His works were performed in many countries and translated into many languages. He won awards and honors, but he never let success change him. He lived simply and stayed close to the people. In 1986, something remarkable happened. Wole Soyinka became the first African to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. The world cheered. The Nobel Committee said they chose him because of his work, which in a wide cultural perspective and with poetic overtones fashions the drama of existence. Nigerians were proud. Finally, the world was seeing what they already knew. Wole Soyinka was one of the greatest writers of his time. Even then, he stayed humble. In his Nobel lecture, he spoke about Africa, justice, and the need for peace. He reminded the world that Africa was not just a land of problems, but a place of deep wisdom, creativity, and strength. But Wole was not done. He kept writing, kept speaking, and kept fighting for what was right. When military rulers returned to power in Nigeria in the 1990s, Wole did not stay silent. He criticized them in speeches, books, and interviews. He received threats, and his life was often in danger. But once again, he refused to be afraid. He spent some time in exile, living outside Nigeria. But even from far away, he continued to speak for his country. He met with world leaders, joined human rights groups, and worked with other African thinkers. His voice was strong, clear, and respected. Wole Soyinka's story is not just about one man. It is about what happens when someone refuses to accept injustice. It is about the power of art, the strength of truth, and the courage to stand alone if necessary. In every play he wrote, every poem he recited, and every speech he gave, Wole reminded the world that freedom is worth fighting for even when the cost is high. Wole Soyinka sat quietly on a wooden chair, surrounded by tall bookshelves and stacks of paper. A small lamp lit the room with a soft yellow glow. Outside, the streets of Lagos buzzed with traffic, music, and the voices of the people. But inside his study, there was silence. It was in this silence that Wole's ideas were born, ideas that would shake the powerful and speak to the hearts of millions. After winning the Nobel Prize in 1986, Wole Soyinka became a global voice. He could have chosen a comfortable life traveling the world, writing books, and enjoying fame. But he didn't. Instead, he continued to speak out about injustice, not just in Nigeria but across Africa and the world. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Nigeria fell under military rule again. The generals in charge promised change but delivered more corruption, fear, and suffering. The press was tightly controlled. Journalists were arrested. People were afraid to speak their minds. But Wole Soyinka spoke louder than ever. He wrote powerful essays and delivered speeches that called the military rulers enemies of progress. He compared them to disease and darkness. His words were fire, and the generals didn't like fire. One of his essays, The Open Sore of a Continent, described how greed and power had wounded Africa. It spread like wildfire in universities, newspapers, and among students. Wole believed that a writer must not only create beauty but also fight evil. He said, "The man of action is not different from the man of thought." For him, words were not just letters on a page, they were weapons of change. In 1993, Nigeria held elections. People were excited. At last, it seemed like democracy was returning. A wealthy businessman, Abeokuta, won the vote. But the military government refused to hand over power. They cancelled the results and locked Abiola in prison. The people were angry. Protests broke out. Students and workers marched in the streets. Tear gas filled the air. Soldiers beat and arrested many. Wole Soyinka was one of the loudest voices, calling for justice. He demanded the military step down and let democracy win. He wrote articles, gave interviews, and joined protest marches, but speaking out came at a cost. In 1994, the new military ruler, General Sani Abeokuta, declared Wole Soyinka wanted. They accused him of treason, claiming he had supported rebel movements and tried to divide the country. Armed soldiers went to his house, but he was gone. Wole had already escaped Nigeria secretly in disguise. He crossed borders quietly and made his way to Europe. From there, he continued his fight. He met with world leaders, attended international conferences, and asked the world to stop supporting Nigeria's military government. Even in exile, Wole never stopped working. He published more books, including plays, poems, and powerful essays. He traveled from country to country, speaking about the damage that dictatorship caused. His voice was now not just Nigerian, not just African, but truly global. Many people in power feared him, but ordinary people loved him. Students read his works in school. Young writers saw him as a role model. Protesters chanted his quotes on the streets. In refugee camps, villages, and cities, people knew his name. Wole Soyinka used his exile not as a time of hiding, but as a time of action. He helped create the Abeokuta station, which broadcast messages of hope and resistance into Nigeria. He worked with human rights groups to document abuses by the Nigerian military. He never stopped dreaming of a free and just Nigeria. Finally, in 1998, things began to change. General Abeokuta died suddenly, and the military government collapsed soon after. A new civilian president was elected. For the first time in many years, Nigeria had hope again. Wole Soyinka returned home to a hero's welcome. People greeted him at the airport with songs, dancing, and tears. He was back where he belonged, even in his old age. Wole didn't rest. He continued to write, teach, and speak. He taught at top universities around the world, including Harvard, Oxford, and Yale. But he always spent time back home in Nigeria, working with young artists, supporting theater, and speaking on national issues. One of Wole's most unique talents was his ability to blend African traditions with modern ideas. In his plays, gods and spirits walk beside politicians. In his poems, Yoruba proverbs dance with modern English. In his essays, deep wisdom meets burning anger. This mixture gave his work its power. It was African. It was human. It was alive. He believed deeply in the strength of African culture. He warned against forgetting traditional values in the rush to copy Western ways. He said that modern progress should not mean rejecting who we are. For Wole, a tree without roots will fall, no matter how tall it grows. Wole also stood firmly against religious extremism. He believed that no belief, no matter how holy, should cause harm to others. He called out both Christian and Muslim leaders when they misled people. He spoke up for women's rights, for children's education, and for freedom of expression. Despite all he had been through, prison, exile, threats, and loneliness, Wole Soyinka never gave up. His hair turned white, but his fire never went out. He showed the world that the pen can be stronger than the gun, and that truth, once spoken, can never be fully silenced. He became more than a writer. He became a voice of conscience, a guardian of freedom, a defender of culture. Yet he remained humble, often saying he was simply a citizen who refused to look away. Even in quiet moments, Wole could be found writing in his study, walking through forests, or mentoring young minds. He stayed curious, passionate, and bold. His life was a story of courage, proof that one person, with words and will, can change a nation. His legacy lives not just in his books, but in every student who dares to question, every artist who dares to speak, and every citizen who dares to dream. The sun was setting in the city of Abeokuta, its golden light spilling over rooftops and trees. Wole Soyinka stood by a window in his house, sipping tea and watching the sky change color. He was now an old man, his hair white like cotton, his eyes calm but sharp. Many people had slowed down at his age. But Wole was still active, still writing, still speaking, still questioning. Though much had changed in Nigeria since his younger days, some things remained the same. Corruption still danced through the halls of power. Injustice still knocked on the doors of the poor. Elections were held, but sometimes the winners were chosen before the votes were even counted. Wole knew the battle for a better Nigeria was far from over. He often said that silence, especially in hard times, was the true enemy. The man dies and all who keep silent in the face of tyranny, he reminded everyone. And so, even in his 70s and 80s, he kept speaking up at public lectures, student events, and interviews. In his later years, Wole became something like a living history book. Journalists, students, and leaders often visited him to learn from his wisdom. They asked about his time in prison, his plays, the Nobel Prize, and the many governments he had opposed. Wole answered with honesty, but never with pride. He didn't like to be praised too much. He believed that every person had a duty, and he was just doing his. He still spent much of his time writing. Books, poems, essays, and even autobiographies came from his pen. His writing became more reflective, looking back on his life, his childhood, and the lessons he had learned. But even as he looked to the past, his eyes were always watching the present. Wole also loved spending time in nature. He had a house deep in the forest, far from the noise of cities. He called it his sanctuary. There, he walked among trees, listened to birds, and thought deeply. He believed that nature was a place of healing, balance, and wisdom. In many of his plays, the forest is a symbol of truth, of testing, and of spiritual power. He often welcomed young people to this place. Writers, actors, musicians, and thinkers came to learn from him. He never treated them like children. He listened to them, challenged them, and encouraged them to speak their own truths. Many of these young minds later became strong voices in their own right, but Wole was not without critics. Some people thought he was too harsh, too proud, or too unwilling to compromise. Others said he focused too much on literature and not enough on politics. But even his critics admitted one thing: he never stopped believing in the power of truth. One of Wole's biggest concerns in his later life was the rise of religious violence in Nigeria. In the north, groups like Boko Haram were burning schools, kidnapping girls, and killing in the name of religion. In the south, greedy pastors collected riches while their followers went hungry. Wole stood firmly against all of it. He said religion should never be used as a weapon. He called on leaders to protect the innocent and stop pretending that faith was an excuse for violence. No God wants blood, he once said in a speech that echoed across the country, but these were dangerous words. Some religious extremists began to threaten him. They sent warnings. Some even burned books and posters with his face. But Wole didn't flinch. He had faced bullets, prison, and exile before. He would not back down now. Even when his own safety was at risk, he chose the road less walked, the path of truth, no matter how lonely it was. In 2014, Wole Soyinka received one of the most personal blows of his life. His daughter, Abeokuta, passed away at the age of 48 after an illness. Wole was heartbroken. He loved his children deeply, and losing one of them tore a hole in his heart. For a time, he withdrew from public events. But slowly, he returned because he believed in turning pain into purpose. He later said that the loss reminded him of how fragile life was and how important it was to use every breath for something meaningful. He continued to write, not only for himself, but for his daughter, for Nigeria, and for the generations still coming. In those years, he also began speaking more about education. He believed that the future of Nigeria depended on the minds of the youth. He visited schools, donated books, and helped build libraries. He wanted every child, no matter where they were from, to have access to knowledge. But education, he said, was not just about reading and writing. It was about courage, creativity, and character. Don't just learn facts, he told students. Learn how to question them. In his public life, Wole continued to take risks. In 2016, when the American presidential election shocked the world, Wole made a strong statement. He announced that if a certain candidate won, he would tear up his green card, the permit that allowed him to live in the United States. When that candidate did win, Wole kept his word. He destroyed the card and said he would no longer live in a country that promoted hate and division. Some people laughed. Others got angry. But again, Wole showed he was a man of action. Not just words. In his later years, he also became more interested in the arts beyond literature. He supported music, dance, and film in Nigeria. He believed that culture was one of Africa's greatest treasures. He worked with filmmakers, musicians, and stage performers, helping to grow Nigeria's creative industry. Even into his 80s, Wole traveled often, spoke at global events, and continued to publish. His voice remained sharp, his humor quick, and his heart full of fire. And yet, he always returned to Abeokuta, to the place where his journey began. Sometimes he walked near Olumo Rock, the giant stone that had watched over him since he was a boy. He would look at it and smile. Life had taken him far, but the spirit of the land had never left him. He never built walls around himself. He spoke to everyone, the rich, the poor, the old, the young. He wore simple clothes, drove himself when he could, and laughed easily. Fame never made him forget who he was. His life was filled with moments of pain, joy, danger, and triumph. But through it all, he remained true to his mission, to use his voice for those who had none. Wole Soyinka once said, "I don't want to write history, I want to make it." And that, truly, is what he did. The morning sun poured softly through the windows of Wole Soyinka's quiet study. On the wooden desk sat an old ink pen, a stack of books, and a notebook filled with neat handwriting. The room was still, but the silence carried power. For over 80 years, Wole Soyinka had filled spaces like this with words that challenged kings, disturbed tyrants, and inspired generations. He had lived through colonialism, independence, civil war, dictatorship, and democracy. He had been jailed, exiled, and threatened. But nothing had ever stopped him from speaking, writing, and dreaming of a better Nigeria and a better world. By this time, Wole Soyinka was no longer just a writer, no longer just a Nigerian figure. He was a global symbol of the fight for freedom, truth, and justice. But even as the world praised him, he continued to do what he had always done: observe, think, and create. In 2021, at the age of 87, Wole surprised everyone again. After many years of focusing on essays, teaching, and public speeches, he returned to fiction. He published Chronicles from the Land of the Happiest People on Earth, his first novel in nearly 50 years. The novel was a sharp political story about greed, corruption, and deception. People praised the book for its courage and creativity. It was bold, just like the man who wrote it. Wole used fiction not just to entertain, but to expose hidden truths. The novel reflected everything he had seen across decades, both the beauty and the brokenness of Nigeria. By now, Wole Soyinka had written more than 20 plays, 10 books of essays, several poetry collections, and many powerful speeches. His work had been translated into dozens of languages and taught in schools and universities around the world. Young people read his plays to understand society. Activists quoted his lines during protests. Leaders, even those who once feared him, now honored him with national and international awards. But Wole always reminded people that awards were not the goal. The goal, he said, was always freedom. Despite his global fame, Wole never allowed the spotlight to blind him. He lived a quiet life most of the time, staying close to nature, reading deeply, and writing daily. He welcomed young writers to his home, gave advice to student groups, and supported cultural festivals and theaters across Nigeria. He loved storytelling, not only on the page but also in conversation. When guests came to visit, he would sit with them on his porch, sharing deep thoughts one moment, then laughing at a joke the next. His wisdom was great, but he never made others feel small. He believed that everyone, even the quietest person, had a story worth hearing. Even in his old age, he stayed strong in his beliefs. He continued to speak out against corruption, injustice, and abuse of power. He encouraged Nigerians to vote wisely, to hold leaders accountable, and to protect the country's democracy. Wole often said that democracy was not just about elections. It was about truth, fairness, and the ability to dream freely. It was about a child being able to go to school, a writer being free to speak, and a farmer being able to feed his family. These were the things he fought for his entire life. And even though the world changed around him, new technologies, new governments, new struggles, his message stayed the same. Truth matters. Wole was also a strong believer in remembering the past. He often warned that a nation that forgets its history is a nation that will make the same mistakes. He wrote about Nigeria's civil war, the years of military rule, and the role that artists and writers played in those times. He wanted young people to understand that freedom was not given. It was earned, often at great cost. He believed in the importance of tradition, of ancestors, and of spiritual connection. But he also believed in reason, science, and questioning beliefs that caused harm. He always walked a careful line between the old and the new, honoring his culture but refusing to be trapped by it. By his late 80s, Wole Soyinka had become something rare, a man who had lived through the biggest events of a nation's life and still had the energy to shape its future. He still received invitations from all over the world, universities, conferences, book festivals. But he chose carefully, focusing only on those events that matched his values. He preferred spending time with students and young artists over being the guest of kings, and though his steps grew slower and his body tired more easily, his voice remained strong. He continued to read at public events, attend theater shows, and sit on discussion panels. Sometimes, he simply walked into a university classroom without notice, surprising students with an impromptu lecture. Many, he became a symbol of hope that even in a world filled with noise and lies, truth can still rise. But Wole always reminded people that he was just one man. He believed that every person could make a difference in their own way. A teacher who inspires students, a parent who tells stories, a child who asks brave questions, all of them, he said, are part of the same struggle. As time went on, younger writers and leaders began to take the stage, and Wole encouraged them. He never tried to hold the spotlight. Instead, he passed it on. He believed that the next generation had their own battles to fight, and their own words to write. He once said, "My job is not to give you answers. My job is to remind you to keep asking questions." And so, in homes, classrooms, theaters, and bookshops across Nigeria and the world, the questions continued. Inspired by Wole's life, people wrote, acted, spoke, and dreamed. His legacy was not made of buildings or statues, but of ideas. His name was not just in books, but in hearts. He had become more than a Nobel laureate. He had become a part of the soul of his nation. Wole Soyinka showed us that one voice can echo louder than guns, that words can break chains, and that stories can change the world. And even when the time comes that his body may rest, his words will live on. In every act of courage. In every poem that speaks truth. In every play that makes people think. In every child who dares to ask, why? That is Wole Soyinka's true victory. That is how legends are born and never forgotten. The end. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.